And we're back for episode number 20. It's been a shorter, long minute before we started recording. Steven and I were talking about how long it's been since we last recorded the podcast, and we've let it slip a little bit. But we have some exciting news, or Steven has some exciting news to share. So let's start with that, because there's a good reason why it's been a month since we've recorded our last episode.
Yeah. Like Bryan said, I mean, it's been a wild month, but I'm officially a dad for the first time. So my wife and I welcomed our daughter, Emerson Burns, and we've been really enjoying and soaking up the time with her these past really 2 weeks. But before that, we were in the hospital for about a week. So it's been several busy weeks, to say the least, but we're blessed and very, very excited and happy to have her here. So we've been enjoying that and enjoying our new roles as mom and dad.
Oh, that's awesome. There's not a greater gift out there, and really excited for y'all. So listeners, if you want to reach out and tell Steven how tired he sounds, so we would love to hear it. So
yeah, I'm sure it's coming through in my voice, or if they just want to reach out and offer some tips, I'm all ears.
Anything you want to say, good or bad, Steven would love to hear it right now.
Yeah, go for it.
Let's jump into this one, Steven.
Yeah.
We want to take a slightly different approach on this one, and we don't have a bullet point or a list of certain things regarding a topic that we want to run through. We really just want to talk about how do builders price projects, and talk about price per square foot and the differences and how builders do different things, with the purpose and the goal of taking the next few minutes to just educate you more on the different things that you might come across, that you might see, so that not only are you just more well-rounded to be comfortable with asking the right questions, but just so you know what you're ultimately most comfortable moving forward with or proceeding with based off of the builders that you're talking to. So, Steven, do you want to start talking about just some of your general thoughts when we get this question quite often on, how do you price your projects? We can talk about how we do it, but it's not about us. It's about the industry, what's most common, and just some things to look out for.
Yeah. Yep. I think this is going to be a really fun episode, and hopefully we can deliver a bunch of value here. Our first episode back in a little while, but it's such a mammoth of a topic that it's really tough to break it down, but we're going to try our best to hit some of the points that we hear a lot from people that are shopping builders or talking to us. And, that's usually one of their first questions is, what's your price per square foot, or what's your cost, or how much is it going to cost you guys to build my home? And so that's what we're here to talk about today. And, hopefully we can shed some light on that for all the listeners. So to start it off, I mean, let's just start there. People ask us, hey, Breven Homes, how do you guys price this project, or what's your price per square foot? Well, first thing, and we always answer this question the same way, is it depends. And I think we've said that on the podcast before. It's not an ideal answer, but it is the truth. It really, really depends on what is that house even going to look like. At that point in the conversation, when people call us and it's an intro call and we don't know anything about them or their project or their family or their lot or anything else, it's an impossible question to answer at that time. So what we have to do as a builder is find out as much information and as many details as possible about all that stuff I just listed, so that we can give them the most accurate estimate at that point in the conversation. So typically what we'll do is we'll gather that information, and based on historical pricing that we've seen and other projects we've built in that same area, we'll take that into account. We'll also figure out, do they want a 2-car garage, or do they want a 10-car garage? Do they want level 1 being the lowest level finish outs, or level 10 being the highest level finish outs on the interior, exterior, all that stuff? Is this a small 1,200 square foot home, or is it a big 5,200 square foot home? There's so many different factors. And what does the lot look like? And are utilities already there? And are we even including that in our pricing? So that is all stuff that plays into this. And I hope that as we're talking through this, people can understand that there's way too many factors to give really an accurate price at this point. So like I said, we always throw out a range at the beginning, and we make it very clear that it's just an estimate. It is not a quote. It is not a binding, we gave you this price and we're going to stick to it at this point. We have no idea. So we're just going off of historical data and what we know, and we give them a range. And we always preface it by saying, we think your project will be no less than, and give them that lower threshold that we really don't think it's going to go lower than, but then give them an open-ended higher end. So just for easy numbers, let's say no less than $250 per square foot to all the way up to $350 plus per square foot, depending on finish out, selections, yada, yada, yada. Right. So I think that's a lot of words to say that it depends. But what are your thoughts here, Bryan?
I think that the other there's a lot of important points with this topic, but another one that comes to mind quite often when we get asked that question, which we've been asked that question 100% of the time early on in any conversation with any of the potential homeowners that we have begun conversations with. But I think the sooner we can get to a time in the conversation where we talk about what is your budget, it comes down to really three things. What is your budget? What are your wants? And what are your needs? And I think the sooner that we can get to that point in the conversation, the quicker we can have a more constructive, realistic discussion around an estimate of, hey, this is where we're aligning. I know 5 weeks ago, whatever it may have been, we said early on, the very first time we ever started talking, when you asked the question, what is your price per square foot? We're 250, no less than $250 a square foot and above. But now that we have this information, we can get a little bit more accurate. So I say this because I think early on there's a perception from the homeowners that they're like, well, I don't want to give you my budget because I still feel like we're in a negotiation and I don't want you to use that against me. But we're so early on in the conversation that we can't even begin to think about what our profit margins are, what the final price is going to be down to the exact penny when we, as Breven Homes, do fixed price contracts. But even if it's a cost plus contract, you still want to have a fairly accurate number before you sign a contract. So I think the sooner that you are willing to share what your budget is, and we've said on previous podcasts that it doesn't matter how much money you have, it doesn't matter how successful you are. Everybody in the world has a budget, whether it's a financial limitation or they just so choose not to spend more than so many dollars. Everybody's got a limit. And so I think that that's really what's key here. And to get to that point, which we don't expect that to happen in the first conversation, right? Because you nor do we want to have that conversation if we don't think that things are going to progress, because we want to be respectful of everybody's time and not waste your time or ours. So I think that's really, really important when we talk about this. Is you have to be transparent and you have to be willing to share with your builder, hey, here are the necessities. Here's what I have to have, and here's what I want, and here's my budget.
I love that. I think you really nailed it by breaking it down to those three prerequisites that we do as a builder need to know. What's your budget? What are your wants and what are your needs? And we do the best we possibly can. And I would imagine most builders do, to combine all three of those into a cohesive mix that you're getting the most you want and the most that you need in that home for as close to your budget as possible. Now, if the goal is to go below the budget, then the builder has to be very, very cognizant of that throughout the whole build. But that budget is our way of knowing, okay, how much can we get you off of your wants and your needs list and still make it financially comfortable for you? So that's definitely something that should be shared with your builder at the right time. And like you said, I know preliminary talks, it's tough to know, okay, are we still negotiating at this point? And, you are probably still shopping builders up until you've narrowed it down. And then you share your budget and you see what these builders can help you do to get as much home for your budget. Basically, that's the way to think about it.
I would just say that if you have the mindset of, well, I'm hesitant to share my budget because I feel like I'm going to play a card too soon and it's going to be used against me. I would challenge you to look past that, because I would say that we're not even at a negotiation point anyway. We're just trying to see if we can do our absolute best to get you all of your wants and all your needs within the number that you've thrown us. And it's our job to align with that. And you've heard us throw around the term value engineering, and Steven just mentioned some of that. That's what we're trying to do. We're actually on your side. And then further on down the road, we throw out a number. And if you believe that it's not reasonable or you feel the need to negotiate, then that's the time to do that. But early on, you're not playing a card too soon where you're losing your leverage or your advantage or whatever your thought process is by giving the budget sooner rather than later.
Yeah. And I want to add that out of all the time that we've been doing this, I don't think we've ever had somebody that came to us and said, hey, I want to build a 1,000 square foot home and my budget is $10 million, right? And I use those as extreme examples that nobody really comes to us and has a very, very healthy budget that is over what they actually need for what they want. You know, I guess what I'm getting at is most people come with more wants and needs than they can afford. And the reason I say that is because I think buyers and, you know, people that want to build a custom home are very savvy. And I think they know kind of to some degree how much that they can afford and also how much they're willing to spend. And that's why I tell the listeners this is that there's no harm in sharing that budget with a potential builder. You know, it's not like it's even a negotiation. It's just, hey, does this even add up? And, you know, like I said, I haven't seen yet in all the time that we've been doing this that somebody has had a very excess budget for what they actually wanted to build. So I just say that because I don't think you can go wrong by sharing a budget that you think might be too high for what you want, because it's probably not.
That's really important. And most people, even though we are dealing with very intelligent homeowners, most of them, if not all of them, don't work in this industry, and so they don't know what they don't know, and that's why they are talking to builders to general contract their house and build their house and leverage, utilize their expertise and pay for that service. I say this because even people that are very successful, have a lot of money, feel like they have a pretty good understanding of costs. Steven and I are in conversations daily about how there are people that are just shocked at how expensive it is to build, right? No matter what you want or what you need, they're like, wow, this got a lot more expensive than I thought. I mean, I've talked to Steven, we can count on many hands how many people we talked to that said, we want to move forward. They get to a crossroads and they say, wow, this looks a whole lot different than it did when we started this journey. And once we go down this road, that's the point of no return. And we just don't feel comfortable with that financially. So we're going to put this on pause, and they ultimately end up not building at all. So I share this because it's not meant to scare you. It's just meant to educate you that if you want to build a custom home, the sooner you can share your budget and your wants and needs with the right builder, the sooner you can get to a point in that conversation where you can say, hey, here's the best we can do to get you everything you want and need within that budget and get you as comfortable as possible. So,
Yep. Definitely good points, and much better that way than trying to work backwards. You come to a builder with everything you already wanted and needed designed into a home that you've already worked through an architect with and fallen in love with, present it to the builder and say, this is everything I want. This is the champagne. And you share your beer budget with them. That's what we like to say. You know, people have champagne taste on a beer budget, and it doesn't mesh. And then unfortunately, we have to be the bearer of bad news that, we have to go back to them and say, okay, look, we've crunched all the numbers. We've looked at everything that you want. And unfortunately, it doesn't align with your budget. So let's talk about what's most important to you. Would you like to raise your budget? Most times that's a no, or they can't. And so then we have to talk about dialing back their dream home that they've already fallen in love with. So not an easy conversation. And that's why it's very, very important to have these conversations earlier rather than later with your builder or with any builder as you're planning your custom home. So the goal is, of course, for us and for the clients to just get you into a new home, right? It may not be 100% of what you want. And I would argue most houses aren't, unless you have an unlimited budget. there's no way, people have to make compromises and sacrifices on things that they want because it's only what they can afford, and that we see that across all of the spectrum of budgets, anywhere from 700,000 all the way up to 2 million. There's still people that want more than they can afford. And that's where we have to try to align those things the best we can as a builder.
So, Steven, give us a few examples. Let's dive into that. I mean, let's talk a little bit about the cost. Where can we save the most money, and what are some things we've done? Just some examples of some things we've done with builder or some homeowners in the past where we said, hey, where can we cut that you're still happy or pleased with your final product, but we're not going to do X, Y, and Z to get you to that number.
It's a great question. You and I were just talking about it before this podcast started, that has to happen early on. And it typically goes all the way back to the architect and the design of the actual plan set. A lot of people think, okay, I'm going to design the footprint. I'm going to get this whole house exactly the way I want it. And then if I have to compromise on, maybe doing granite instead of quartz, okay, that's fine with me. I can make that sacrifice to get it down to my budget. But unfortunately, I mean, Bryan, you and I have seen that just because you are willing to sacrifice on some interior finish outs, it just isn't enough. I mean, the only way that we can significantly cut most of these homes down to people's budgets is to go back to the very beginning and really go back to the architect and say, hey, how can we shrink this house, whether it's lowering the ceilings or bringing the walls in or cutting out some very expensive square footage is the way we look at it. So that we can make ends meet here, and the most expensive things on any build are going to be your foundation, your framing, basically the skeleton or the structure of that home, the roof, the sheetrock, all that stuff starts to add up. And the only way you can cut that stuff back is by cutting square footage, right? Or cutting volume, I guess is the better way to put it. So lowering those ceilings or lowering those roof heights or bringing that house in a little bit smaller. So there's a couple key areas we look at first. And I mean, if you can cut, of course, any plumbing areas like a full bathroom, cut it down to a half bath or cut a half bath out completely, things like that. I mean, that's expensive square footage. A lot of times people want oversized garages or very, very large front or back patios, which is beautiful and great. But unfortunately, that adds to the price per square foot, and it's not even livable square footage. So, those are all things that we think through. And then once we get past that, that's where really kind of, you're saving the dollars and not the pennies. Then we get to where we can save some pennies, and saving pennies comes really on the finish out. So, maybe dialing back on the appliances or cutting out some cabinets in certain areas or dialing back on the countertop selections or flooring and tile and those kind of things. So those are just some examples. But, I mean, all in all, we kind of get to a lower limit with custom homes that at some point we just can't cut anymore, and so that's where it really comes back to the square footage and a lot of times the lot. We include lot prep and utilities and all that stuff in most of our contracts. And so it's something that, when we have a really high price per square foot, it typically falls back on that lot selection.
Yep. No, that's important. The lot can be a huge variable. And we say, I'm just going to reiterate one thing you said. We often say you save dollars when you're working with the architect, and you save pennies when you are working with trying to save on things after that towards the end, the finish outs, the appliances, the selections. So just some examples to add on to what Steven said. We've worked with many clients where they say, hey, I want, not need, I want an outdoor kitchen. Okay, well, that can add anywhere from $10,000 to $20,000 to $30,000, depending on how sophisticated that is and how complex it is. So we'll say, well, if you're trying to get to a budget, what if we remove the outdoor kitchen, but we still add what we call the stub outs? So you still have the electricity, the sewer, the water, the gas right there, so that you can build that you can build that outdoor kitchen at a later time after you've moved in and you're in a financial place where you're ready to put money into that, right? So that could be a $20,000 savings right off the top, right? Those are some bigger things that certainly we would ask or would hope and expect that that's discussed at the architectural phase versus later on. Oh, hey, it's down the road. We've done a bunch of work, and then, oh, hey, let's cut that, right? So, that's one good example, but there's a bunch of them, and we go through that with all of our clients, right? I mean, we can go on and on about, well, we wanted to make this a full bath, let's do a half bath, and that can cut several $1,000s. But if you're looking to cut tens of thousands of dollars, you have to look at the lot, and you have to look at the foundation and the overall square footage, right? Like you said.
Yep. Bryan, maybe you can walk our listeners through how different builders price by the square foot or by just a total price. Or, I mean, I think some people get confused on that. They'll talk to different builders and they'll hear one price per square foot from one builder that's significantly different than a price that they hear from, say, us or another builder. And some builders don't even quote a price per square foot. They might just say, hey, I can build this house for you for $500,000, right? And then also, how do I know as a potential homeowner what that includes? Every builder includes different things. And so, I mean, maybe you can help kind of guide us through that.
Yeah, it's a it's a doozy of a question. There's a lot there. And the short answer is it requires a lot of your time and a lot of your effort to go out and ask a lot of questions, right? The builders are going to throw you different numbers. And then we've talked about this numerous times, Steven. You have to make sure that you are doing your best to compare apples to apples. So to your point, Steven, we could throw out an initial estimate without a whole lot of information saying, yeah, we're in the ballpark. We do, let's say we're at the stage where we have some initial plan set, right? We're in the middle of working with the architect and it's not finalized, but it's enough to say, hey, let's start to dial in a number here. We come back with, for example, I'm just throwing out a number, $350 a square foot. And you're still talking to some other builders, of course, because you haven't ultimately decided on a builder. And somebody else comes back with $300 a square foot. And you're saying, wow, that's a significant difference. I mean, about 15% difference. You're like, okay, why? How is one that much cheaper? Is there that much profit? You start thinking through these things, but you have to ask a lot more questions, right? How do selections work? What are my allowances? We've seen some builders where they say, yeah, you're going to get $300 a square foot, but it's not realistic because they've got $20,000 in the budget for cabinets, but you have a 7,000 square foot house where it's not even possible, right? So it's hey, well, here's your budget. We can get you cookie cutter Walmart cabinets that we just go pick off the shelf, or you're going to have to spend more. And by the time you go through the selection process and your expectations have already been misguided, you're starting to have emotions and feelings of frustration. And then you might be at that $350 a square foot, all said and done, right? So you went with a $300 per square foot builder and you ultimately had a less pleasant experience. So by no means am I suggesting always go with the most expensive builder, right? I think we've said this before, Stephen. I think if you are going to go out and interview a lot of builders, you just have to be prepared that it's going to take you a lot of time. That's just the journey that you have to take. And you have to ask a lot of questions and you have to make sure you're comparing apples to apples. And in many cases, if I were building a custom home tomorrow and I didn't know what I do know, I would say, I will go interview builders and I'm probably not going to select the cheapest builder and I'm probably not going to select the most expensive builder, right? I don't know, but you're just looking for, hey, who's giving me the most information with the most clarity of, hey, here's my price per square foot and this is what this includes, right? I think that's what's key. And you're going to get a lot of what we've seen in the industry is you get a lot of really vague answers. Yeah, we'll do it for $350 a square foot. Okay, well, I've got about 1 million questions after that. Does it? What are my allowances? Does it include lot prep? What are the unknowns? What are your concerns with that number? So you go on and on and on. And that's why I just fall back to nobody can do that work but you. And, I think you just have to know which questions to ask. And we've done another podcast on that topic.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to touch on a couple things that you brought up there. That number one, I mean, you're right that when a builder gives you a price per square foot, one of the best questions to ask is what is included in that and what is excluded out of that, right? And a lot of times that will be, hey, utilities are excluded from that price, lot prep is excluded from that price, but all of your allowances for selections are included in that price. Things like that, that you really want to make sure you're aware of what builders are including and what builders are excluding certain things from their price per square foot. That is going to be a huge thing to note as you're trying your best, which it is impossible, but trying your best to compare builders apples to apples, like we've talked about so many times. Another thing that you brought up too, and this is kind of a funny way to think about it, but you mentioned you wouldn't even want to go with the cheapest builder building your custom home. And I would agree with that. And I would encourage every listener to not go with the cheapest builder because that's a recipe for disaster. Typically in the sense that they're probably using the cheapest materials they can get their hands on. I mean, it may even be reused or repurposed stuff that they weren't able to use on another job, or old materials or returns or something like that. I'm just spitballing here, but there is probably a reason why they're able to hit such low prices if they really are. They might be using the worst trades in the entire area. And, with bad trades comes bad workmanship and also really awful warranty experience. So you move into your brand new shiny home, and even if they could get it to the finish line and it looks halfway decent, your next year or 2 years of warranty is going to be a nightmare. Trying to get the builder back and trying to get those trades back that were underpaid and didn't quote the job right and all that kind of stuff. So it's just more fuel to the fire that you really, really don't want to go with the cheapest builder. I mean, there's probably a red flag that should go up whenever you hear a price that is significantly lower than the other builders.
And just to interrupt you there, Steven, on that comment, because something that's really important, you do put yourself at risk beyond just a poor experience. And that's a legal risk. That's a risk that builder is the cheapest and they can't pay their bills and have a successful building company, that they could go bankrupt. But you know what? It's deeper than that. You can say, well, I can survive that. But if they're not paying their trades, those trades will put a lien on your property, and that's your problem now. So there's a lot more to this that can get legal and get nasty really quick and make this a much bigger problem than just your builder.
Man, that's such a good point. And just a very quick little side story on that. We actually met with some folks that were in that unfortunate situation. They had a home that was about halfway done and were trying to get it into sheetrock and continue, but their builder had completely gone dark on them. They believe he went out of business and filed for bankruptcy, but they don't know. They can't even get a hold of the guy. Some of the trades had not been paid, and so they had to go through court rulings and make sure that there were no liens placed on the house. I mean, this was a big project and a big house and multi-million dollars, and the builder just collapsed on them. So it can happen anytime, anywhere, in any market, but it's just something you really need to be aware of as you're selecting a builder and making sure that you're not just picking a fly-by-night builder that is only here for the short term and won't be able to give you a viable product that they stand behind for the many years to come. So
that's a big deal and a big red flag. I'd have concerns going with the cheapest builder because that can put you in a nightmare of a situation.
Yep. So I don't know, Brian. I mean, what do you think? Any final thoughts here? How do we want to wrap this one up?
I think what we didn't talk about here is the apples to apples comparison we did, but you also have to understand your risk beyond, okay, well, I've got what I believe is a good comparison, but then how is the contract laid out, right? What is the next step after this? Okay, now you've got a contract in front of you and you have to sign the dotted line. And we've done a podcast previously. I don't know what episode it is. We can go back and look, but on the different types of contracts, the cost plus contracts, fixed price contracts, and there's several different variations of those. Those are really the two fundamental contracts, and then there's some minor detail differences in how those are put together. But I think that's the next thing. So from the listeners, we'd love to hear if you've listened to this and or the contract episode. What other questions do you have around that? So really, those are my closing comments, Steven. Is just I think that this is one part of course, a much bigger journey, as we always talk about, this journey of designing and ultimately building and moving into your dream custom home.
Yep. Good final thoughts. And I just went back and checked. That is episode number 7 for folks that are interested in listening. We talked all about fixed price contracts versus cost plus contracts. Those are the two main contracts that most builders use. Really break that down into detail and go into pros and cons of each. And I just want to touch on, and maybe a good final thought here is, we had an episode with our architect, or one of our fantastic architects, Steve Iltis, and he said it best that a $1 million home is going to cost $1 million one way or another, right? Whether the builder quotes you an $800,000 build and then you're in for $200,000 of extras because the allowances were too low or whatever, it's still $1 million build, but you're just severely disappointed because your expectations were set wrong. The builder that quotes you $1 million and didn't get the job is probably the right guy. Unfortunately, they just didn't get the opportunity to run it through. So, that's Steve Iltis's comment, and we still stand by it too. We definitely think that that's a good way to sum it up on pricing a home.
Absolutely.
But well, Bryan, thanks for another episode. This is episode 20. I can't believe it's already been 20 episodes, and we can guarantee we won't go as long as another month before our next episode, but it's been fun, and
we really do enjoy putting these together. It's something that's really good for us, just to think through our thoughts, share our knowledge and our expertise and our experiences. And we really would love to get your feedback on your continued feedback on how we can make these better and better. So it's been a blast, and like Steven said, we're not going to go another month without recording another one. Whether it's perceived as an excuse or not, Steven had a big life event, and time has been precious. So,
yep, absolutely. And final thoughts: if all the listeners have found value in this episode or any of the episodes they've listened to from us, if you don't mind just giving us a rating or a comment on whatever platform you're listening, those 5-star ratings really help us out and help spread the podcast to other people that would find value as well. So that's our ultimate goal. We want to help people not be so lost in the custom home building journey. And until next time, we're going to keep doing what we can.